Danielle, thank you. Danielle, who's working with us, will be monitoring the chat. And as you may have just heard, we're also going to be recording this and sharing the recording on our YouTube and Facebook pages. So you can revisit and rewatch it if you want, or if somebody you know wasn't able to attend, please refer them to it. Also, please follow us on our social media. We're at Rung for Women, and Emily's organization is at Tech STL. Anytime you want any trailblazing news regarding women and women in the workforce and how we are addressing the wage and the wealth gap, you want to make sure that you're following us to find out what we're doing in the region. And lastly, you can visit us on our websites. We're at rungforwomen.org, and Emily, I believe techstl.org. Is that correct?
.com, but yes.
Is it .com? Okay.
Yep, Tech STL.
Sure. techstl.com. All right. So we'll get started. I'll preface it just kind of by setting the context and letting you all know what led us to today. There was an article that came out several months ago, earlier this summer. I believe it was from Smart Best, but the article reported that St. Louis was voted one of the lowest ranking cities for women in tech and tech adjacent careers as it relates to pay. And so the work we're doing at Rung for Women, we are very committed to addressing the gender wage and wealth gap. And Emily's organization is working specifically with in making sure that women have opportunities in technology and tech careers. And we felt like if we're going to really address those disparities, then we wanted to know firsthand from the women themselves what the barriers really were that they were facing in the workplace. And so that was sort of the catalyst for this survey. But I'm going to sort of moderate and have a conversation and dialogue with my comrades here. But first, I'll let them tell you a little bit about themselves or either the organization. So I'll start with you, Leslie. Leslie Gill is the president of Rung. But Leslie, you want to tell us a little bit about Rung? No, can't hear you. Leslie's muted.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
You would think by now I would know how to use Zoom. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Leslie Gill. I'm the president of Rung for Women. And I feel like today is going to be such an exciting conversation because I see so many familiar names on the screen. So I feel like we are among family, Emily. And so we can be candid, we can be honest. And I'm really excited to share the results of the survey.
Awesome. Awesome. Emily, you are really like when I think about technology in St. Louis and we have a question and we need to know something or partner with somebody, Emily always comes to mind. In fact, you'll be here in a couple of days speaking to our staff. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your work at Tech STL? And you got to unmute too.
Yeah, the issue is the host has to unmute.
Oh, the host has to unmute us. Okay, Danielle, we have to unmute Emily.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. I didn't know if I was supposed to like do charades of like I can't unmute myself.
Yeah,
I'm not quite sure how to share that. Okay, well, so hey everyone, good morning. My name is Emily Hemingway and I am the executive director of Tech STL. We are a newly established organization. We've only been around for about a year. We're the first tech council servicing the greater St. Louis region. And so we're charged with being the loudest voice on behalf of tech innovation for the people of St. Louis. And one of our biggest priorities is really making innovation more inclusive of how are we celebrating and leveraging the fact that we do have a highly diverse workforce and technology has some of the best job opportunities when it comes to good pay and upward mobility and growth opportunities, but we've got to make sure that those opportunities are equitable, that we have as much diversity as possible in these positions. So this is definitely a topic that I am passionate about, that our team at Tech STL is passionate about. And this project has been really exciting to be able to continue having more of this conversation and finding the data that we need to really understand the full scope and urgency of the current situation when it comes to having diversity, at least in our side, diversity in technology, but the bigger conversation of diversity in the workforce.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think well said, Emily, and you definitely are a voice. And Rung certainly wants to amplify many more voices so that it's not just our organizations, but we're so happy to see so many people on the call with an interest in this. And so we'd like to start with just once again giving you some context. Maybe Leslie, we'll start with you. You want to talk a little bit about why Rung even decided to conduct the survey? What were we hoping to get out of it? And then Emily, I'll let you kind of tag in on that.
Yeah, so Rung for Women is a career accelerator, and we were really focused on and starting to think really intentionally about how we get more women to build wealth, but to move them into careers where women are traditionally underrepresented, careers that have growth potential in the region, and careers that would meet a person's thriving wage goal. And so we sort of narrowed our focus to 3 industries: geospatial, technology, and advanced manufacturing. And so what we really wanted to do as we were starting to think about having more women move into these industries and sectors was to validate some of the concerns that we were hearing. And also to really determine what were the barriers to success, what are the barriers to entry, and how could we use the data to really inform our work around getting more women to move up the economic opportunity ladder and moving into these fields. And so really pleased with what the survey told us, really pleased with the response rate. And I think we're going to get into some of the details of the data here very shortly. But for us, it was really to validate our work and to make sure that everything that we were hearing anecdotally was really supported by evidence and data. And so I think we have a really good starting point to be able to really launch our focus into technology, geospatial, and advanced manufacturing.
Absolutely. And I know when we initiated this survey, we thought at first, we were going to go at it alone, and we said we're getting there, but we're really not the thought leader in the space around technology, and that's one of the career tracks we're focused on. And we said, okay, who's the guru in the region? Who can we bring in? And it happened. We had a conversation with Emily. And so, Emily, from your perspective, why was it important for you to be involved? What did you hope to learn from the survey that would inform your work?
Yeah, well, so what became really clear with Tech STL from the beginning is that data is a major gap in this region, that data is power. Data doesn't lie, right? But the lack of data makes it easier for you to not see the glaring problems. It makes it easier for you to not have accountability and partnership around solving these big, wicked problems, right? That until we had the data, it was really difficult for us to address the other major gap in St. Louis, and that's collaboration, right? That these kinds of efforts require both, that it requires data accountability, so there is transparency, there is trust, there are shared goals, so that then we can start working on the trust building that we have across the region of, we can't tackle these kinds of challenges alone, right? These are the big, complex, wicked problems of St. Louis. And it requires relationship building. It requires conversation. It requires data accountability so that we all know where we're going and that we're all held accountable for the work that we're doing. This is a great example of something that it really requires. It requires champions. It requires organizations that are able to step in and say, I can't do everything, but I can do this one thing, and I will own that task, right? I will own this, so that we can then start really uncovering what are the big problems that we need to solve, and then who are the right players that we have at the table so that we can start really having some impact. And this is an example of that, right? Working on supporting women breaking down barriers, improving access, improving culture, improving policy, all of these things. This is a really big, messy kind of problem. And I'm excited that it's something that we have Rung for Women, that Tech STL is able to really get in and kind of carve out a place for us within this ecosystem. And that this seems like I see a lot of hope in the direction that St. Louis as a region is starting to move towards, because I feel like we've got the conversations, the organizations, the leaders that are in place are starting to recognize that we have to do these things differently and we have to do them better. So I'm eager to continue down this kind of conversation path over the next year and see where we can go.
Absolutely. This is just a start. And we both know from working with employers in the region who I think very much want to address what the perceived problems are. But to your point, Emily, the data really helps define what the problem is so that we can more adequately and appropriately address it. So I think that they're going to get a lot of benefits from just the work we're starting. But to give the participants on this call some context, Leslie, what was the response like, and how many responses did we get, and what was the kind of demographic information that we collected?
Yeah, so we had about 500 responses, and maybe just a little over 500 responses. We know that 96% of the respondents were women, and almost 60%, 57% were people of color, women of color. And so that was exactly sort of the target and the demographic that we were looking at. We really wanted to make sure that we were collecting data from women who were in the workplace, doing the work, and really could inform all of our collective decision-making, but really to change, to Emily's point, to change the culture of what we were seeing in certain environments, right? To make it more welcoming, to have those environments be more diverse. And so the response rate was really great. We were really, really pleased with the response rate, and especially with the percentage of responses from women of color. We wanted to make sure that those voices were represented so that we could really use that information to go back to employers to really talk about what women are saying and what women of color are saying.
Yeah, I know that those respondents, we were collecting information beyond just even the general demographics, obviously with gender and ethnicity, but their employment status and position levels, salary ranges, and education, minimum education. So women were very forthcoming in this survey. So we got some really good data points.
Yeah, I just would like to add, Rhonda, like the one thing, and I know we'll get into more detail, but the one sort of nugget that was most compelling for me was the fact that because we sort of dug deeper than just a regular baseline survey, we really did get into position, title, salary. But the one nugget that was really, really compelling for me is that the majority of women in entry-level positions and almost a quarter of women in executive and leadership or executive and senior management positions do not earn enough salary to sustain a family.
Wow.
And so that just actually blew me away. I was sad, I was disappointed. I had all of the emotion, but it also really validated for me the importance of our work. The importance of, Emily being a female leader in the tech space. Like, we have got to have more representation to ensure that, this salary disparity really gets to the forefront of these conversations, and making sure that women are at the table to be able to influence those conversations is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, women not making a thriving wage to take care of their families in spite of having the education and working very hard is very unsettling. Emily, from your perspective, what was one of your biggest takeaways in terms of like the surveys and what we found out?
Well, so I mean, personally, as a working mom, I definitely took note of the data on burnout, right?
Yes.
The overwhelming sense of burnout that women have across the spectrum, right?
Mhm.
Depending upon their level of position. But also, I think one of the biggest challenges, and we see this a lot in tech as well, is that um, men are much faster to identify their role as being a STEM or a tech position, right?
Mhm.
And they're more comfortable negotiating around the skills that they have, and really identify that they have advanced skills and that they have a position that should be paid more,
Yeah.
and that they have enough education and skills in order to do it well, and that they should be compensated for that.
Mhm.
Women are not as comfortable really claiming that I have a tech job, that this is a STEM job, that I have
Right.
high value skills, right? That I have enough education. Oftentimes we think it's our fault that we don't get paid
Mhm.
enough, right? And that it's because we just don't have enough training. But in likelihood, we are on par, if not often ahead of our male counterparts, right? That it's, and so sometimes it's men are just a lot more comfortable claiming the fact that they're ready and that they should earn more. And women see a lot of our barriers. And granted, we do also have a lot of limitations when it comes to, we don't tend to have more STEM related training that oftentimes, and we saw this even in our IT labor market report, is that the STEM fields that men go into are often very different than the STEM fields that women go into.
Yeah.
That women tend to be more in the business operations or marketing management, and men tend to go more heavily towards science and mathematics.
Mhm.
And so it's the differences in how we compare ourselves, I think is it's something that as women we all really have to come to terms with, but also our companies have to come to terms with as well. They need to ask different questions. They need to evaluate candidates differently. They need to acknowledge that there is bias on their end, even more so in their hiring practices and in their evaluation, right? So it can't just be STEM across the board. It can't just be certificates across the board, because we see that there are discrepancies. And so I think part of this is being able to more clearly define what are the severe biases and hindrances, and why is it urgent for our institutions, for our hiring partners, for our companies, for the culture in our community, to start addressing those things. So all of these things help really frame that conversation more clearly for everybody.
Yeah, and I would just add, as a woman of color, I think for me, this notion that women of color are overrepresented in the entry level, lower end of those tech career jobs, and completely underrepresented in leadership and executive roles. And so that sort of, further perpetuates this notion that women of color continue to be excluded, continue to have issues around discrimination. All of the things that Emily just mentioned are really amplified when you talk about women of color.
Mhm. Yeah, very concerning. And you both brought up some interesting, when it seems like there's such a constellation and intersection of all these issues and barriers. What we don't want to do is think that this mountain is so big that we can't climb it and get discouraged, because I think in partnership with like Tech STL, Rung, other organizations, now that we've more clearly defined what some of these issues are, then we can start at least chipping away at them. I'll throw this out to either one of you who wants to start. What were some of those other topics that were covered in the survey? I mean, obviously, when we look at the wage gap and the wealth gap, and the pay disparity comes out on top. But what we found, and we made the survey more comprehensive so that it wasn't addressing just the salary disparities, but we wanted to dive into some other issues. What were some of those other topics that we received responses to in the survey, and how did those strike you? So either one of you all can start.
I've got one.
Okay.
Yeah. So one that really stood out to me was the questions around mentors, right? And do women feel like either having a mentor or not having a mentor hinders their ability to have upward mobility, right? To get the next hiring, to really navigate the next step up. And that's also something that we've really been looking at just across the board of, not only mentorship programs, but allyship programs. And how are we working? Because right now we're working with our corporate partners and Forward Through Ferguson on really exploring what a corporate allyship initiative would look like, because we're seeing that that's the next wave of implementing DEIA practice and really working towards advancing workplace policy, is that it can't just be top down, it also has to be bottom up, right? That you have to have advocates on every level of your workplace, because they need to understand across the board, not only how are they supporting one another, but how are they making better and smarter decisions for every spectrum, right, of those positions. And so that's something that there is, I think there is very clearly a gap in having not only mentors who are signing up to support people who have barriers to access and opportunity, but that as a community that we're doing more to support those things. That we are making those resources available, because it absolutely is stopping women and people of color and people with disabilities and people from rural communities, right? Like any kind of person that feels like that they have some sort of barrier, having an advocate on the inside, having teams that really understand what those limitations are and that they're going to bat for you, right? It's still coming down to that power dynamic of who has power to lift you up. And unfortunately, there are still very clear power dynamics in the workplace. And how are we creating opportunity for those who are willing to advocate to give them what they need to do it?
Yep. And I would just add, because of occupational segregation, obviously women aren't leaning into or haven't historically leaned into roles in technology or geospatial, or they didn't identify, to Emily's point, they didn't identify themselves in those roles. And so I think, for me, as I looked at the data, I was really compelled by the notion that employers really need to do an audit of their job descriptions and really take a deeper look at those jobs that really do require a degree and the type of degree. So often what we're seeing is women wanting to be career changers, to move into these new fields, but because hiring managers or companies haven't updated the requirements, they often don't feel like they're qualified to apply because maybe they don't have a degree in a technical field, or maybe they don't have a degree at all, but the roles often don't really require degrees. They just need either the certification or the training or the on-the-job training. And so I really think the data further validated this notion around needing companies to really be very, very intentional and specific about the criteria to do the job. And it doesn't always mean a degree, especially for women who are changing careers, who maybe started in education or a service industry, and that degree isn't relevant anyway. And so are there other ways, other points of entry into these fields where they can still be successful? And so that is really a lot of the work around Rung for Women, is to make sure that we can help women reskill and upskill for these new opportunities, looking at those middle skill jobs that don't require a 4-year degree, but really can move them into these good paying jobs quickly.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and one in which employers hopefully will start embracing more, because when you think about all that can be done to address this issue, simply changing job descriptions and having pay transparency, it's low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's not something that requires a massive change effort. And so just being, like you said, Leslie, more intentional about that. Emily, you brought up something that I'd like you to maybe dive a little deeper on. You mentioned mentors and allyship, but one of the things in having conversations with employers that we found is they said, listen, we would love to have more supports in place for women, but when you have a workplace that doesn't have women or doesn't have a woman of color, where do you start? And so you almost have to start with your existing workforce, which is primarily male. What is that male allyship like? What would that look like to you? Because I know we throw that word around, but mentors and allies, if it's men in the workforce and they are supporting women in that way, how would you envision employers like really doing that?
Well, so what we are looking at is how, for Tech STL, we are trying to really be an ecosystem champion where
Right.
we're not trying to get in and compete on programs. Instead, we're trying to really look at what are the things that elevate the entire network.
Yeah.
And a regional allyship initiative is one of those examples, right?
Mhm.
It's a topic that would not only benefit our corporate members, but also our startup members, our nonprofits, right? That this is a conversation that does really drop this work, like I said, not just from a top down, but from a ground up perspective of also reframing on it's not just about the mentoring aspect, it's about the ally aspect.
Yes.
And that's so much more about the showing up not from a skills standpoint, but from a human standpoint, right? Of like, how are you advocating on behalf of the personal experience that goes with this, of the sense of belonging, and not just the can you do the task, right? And so it's this work, because it isn't just linear, it isn't just around hard skills, it's also around soft skills, it's around things that aren't very that aren't super clear, right? That this can be very murky, that you have to create, and this is one of the reasons why I love working with Forward Through Ferguson is, they really talk about building a culture of trying. You have to build that culture, not only within the organizations, but across the community, right? That this is not an easy thing to solve. This is people showing up every day and recognizing that just because they work there, just because they're in St. Louis, they get to be part of this conversation, and that we all have a responsibility of showing up. As women in tech, our job is to show up so that we're able to support and open the doors for more women in tech, right? That we're willing to continually have this conversation. And what we're looking at for Tech STL is how are we helping to invest in the mechanisms to do this on a broader scale? How are we able to show up and give access to the organizations and the individuals who are really ready to jump in and make this happen? So it doesn't land on the organizations themselves, that this is investment that we need to make in St. Louis, and in the people that we have here and the opportunity that we can help create for them.
Yeah, I love that notion of taking a regional approach and have it top down, bottom up, so that we're coming at this from a much broader angle. The respondents of the survey, they spoke, as I mentioned, and you guys have touched on in terms of the salary and the wage disparities. There were also barriers as it related to just lack of advancement opportunities, certain the lack of mentorships or training opportunities. What were some of those other workplace environmental issues that came up from respondents in the survey that it's important for the listeners here to know about? Leslie?
I would just add, just this notion that, discrimination is still real and
Still there.
hasn't gone anywhere. And so that's a real barrier, specifically in environments where women are already working. Again, that being discriminated against and not having the access to opportunity to grow and advance. I also found it very interesting that hostile work environments, right?
Yes.
Likely because, they've been, and no shade against men, but likely because they've been predominantly male environments. When women enter those spaces, there's a level of hostility, and don't enter and like be a high performer and a high achiever and be competitive like that. That environment starts to feel really hostile. And I think, white women, Black women, all women are feeling this hostility in certain cultures. And so, I think our challenge and our call to action really for employers is how do we get these environments to be more inclusive, to really value diversity in the truest sense, and create spaces where women, because you're hiring more women, you can have the affinity groups, you can have those opportunities for belonging and allyship and mentorship.
Yeah, the responses as it relates to hostility were really troubling. I mean, 60% of women have in the survey said that they'd experienced some form of sexual harassment in the workplace. That is, is any sexual harassment, any degree of it or percentage is way too high. But I think the hostility, what came through in the survey was that oftentimes those things that are, the discrimination and the things that are more easily concealed because you can't see it is overtly affecting women in huge ways. Were there, you mentioned the obviously discrimination bias. Were there other patterns in terms of what the experiences were women of color, Black women compared to white women that came out in the survey?
I would say that the social exclusion, right? Yeah. So, going into the environments and, the water cooler talk might be about you. And so you feel excluded, you don't feel like you belong. Certainly a major issue for Black women in those environments compared to white women. So I think that was a clear distinction between race here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Emily, anything in the survey, you are really informed in terms of being immersed sort of in the work and in this area. Was there anything surprising or unexpected that came out in terms of with the responses with the survey for you?
No, I mean, I think especially the next survey that we're doing, we're entering the phase where we're navigating the process of reentry right into the workforce of companies are having to decide how much they're back in the office and how much they're going to continue doing remote or hybrid working. And I know that, at the first part of the pandemic, it was the challenge of getting everyone comfortable with doing remote working, and that, most women, especially mothers, were stuck with carrying a lot of the responsibility of caretaking for their children and for their sick family members and parents. And so remote working tended to be very helpful for a lot of working women, especially in technology, because it gave them the opportunity to have a little bit more flexibility.
Right.
Now the challenge is that a lot of organizations are transitioning back, right? And so that burden once again is being placed on women who had to make adjustments for their kids. They got to where they were able to sustain that, and now trying to figure out how much they can actually be back in the office and still juggle all of these things. I think that this is going to be a challenging journey over the next year of the process of reentry. I think we're going to see a lot of people changing positions and preferring to stay with hybrid or remote positions because their lifestyle has adjusted. I think we also aren't fully recognizing the fact that we still have a lot of PTSD from the pandemic. We still have a lot of sick children, sick families. Women are still carrying that burden. And so that's something that we're definitely trying to pay more attention to, of what this now is looking like. But going back to what Leslie just said, that has a huge implication on the social dynamics, right? That people have now stayed to their neighborhoods, and there's way more diversity by neighborhood than there is even in the offices, right? Like the work environment tends to have more diversity than people in their neighborhoods. And so like now going back into the offices for those that have not been around that they've been working from home, right? Everybody's having to readjust, and the, tension is high. People are still tired. They're still scared, especially as we're going back into what potentially could be a recession, that money is tighter. I think we're going to see hostility. We're going to see friction in the office, because people are now trying to figure out what life is going to be like. And companies are really struggling in that. They're also understaffed, right? So most of these companies are significantly understaffed. And so you're going to see a lot more burnout over the next year. I think all of these things we're going to have to continue monitoring. But as from a data standpoint, we're watching it. From a human standpoint, we're all just having to be a lot more understanding of each other, right?
Yeah,
like we've got to show up with compassion. Or as a leader, you have to take your people into consideration every day, not just their performance, but their mental state, right? Of like, are we prioritizing wellness, especially for those who don't always feel safe and welcome? So these are things that as a community, we have to be discussing, and we have to make it more of a priority for each other of really navigating the next year, because we're not out of this yet. There's still a lot of transition.
Absolutely, absolutely. That great resignation that's now being characterized too as the great reinvention. It's, I guess it's for as bad as things seem, I know at least at Rung, we're seeing overwhelming response in terms of women who do have an interest in shifting and exploring some new opportunities, whether it's in technology or other careers. Jessica mentioned in the chat that we're touching on some very important points. I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity. If you do have a question, make sure you put it in the chat. We appreciate your participation today, and we wanted this to certainly be a dialogue. But if you have experiences or would like to chime in on any of the points that Leslie and Emily have touched on, please feel free to do so. Danielle's monitoring the chat. What would you say you all really want people? Well, first, let me ask you this. Was there anything you think we missed in the survey? It was as comprehensive as we could try to make it, given that we wanted women to actually complete the survey. And with such a high completion rate, I think we achieved that goal. But was there any issues that impact women in the workplace that you think maybe we should have touched on that maybe we didn't?
I think the point that Emily just made around like reentry post-COVID, we know that women were burdened more so during COVID between parenting and caretaking and working and all of the things, or transitioning out of fields where, you didn't have flexibility. And so I think perhaps we do a follow-up to Emily's point, to see over the course of the next year, how are women in particular dealing with reentry, and what percentage of women are really contemplating career change as a result of it, and into careers like technology that have, perhaps some more flexibility around remote or hybrid work environments. I think that would be interesting to see, and maybe even forecast kind of what the future might bring for us.
Yes.
Particularly as we're looking at sectors that are going to be growing in the region. I know when we started this work at Rung for Women, and we looked at the 2019 labor market analysis and labor market data, it said that retail would be growing in the region, retail, customer service opportunities, and then COVID hit. And
healthcare, and then that,
healthcare was also, health sciences was also a growth area in 2019, and then COVID hit. And now we're seeing a major shift to technology, advanced manufacturing, and some of that is also dictated by the political landscape, right? President reshoring and bringing jobs back to the US. There's going to be huge growth in certain sectors. And so how do we really anticipate, people's desire to return to certain environments and reskilling and upskilling to make sure we can meet the demand? I think it will be a really important conversation going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And what, I've always been one to say, I don't like admiring a problem for too long, because at a certain point you have to say, okay, what are we going to do about this? Right. And so this is so layered in terms of, the problem itself. I'd like for us to start talking about like what, even starting with just some of the women on the call, what they can do. But it looks like we have a question from the chat. Let me make sure I get that. Somebody's asking, how many women in St. Louis are in tech careers? How does the 500 compare to it? And also, which fields, careers are called tech for this survey? Emily, you want to talk about how we sort of define, because you did allude to, at first we weren't, women oftentimes don't perceive themselves to be in technology careers, even though they are. You want to take that, how we classify technology careers?
Sure. Yeah. So we have around 30,000 women in the tech workforce in the region. There's just under, so it's about 86,000 altogether. So about a third of our workforce are women. So for this survey, we didn't just focus on women in tech careers. We left it really open, that it was women at work. And then in the survey, they were able to tell us if they saw their job as tech focused. It's interesting because for Tech STL, our big vision, right, is that we're working to make St. Louis the most diverse tech hub in the country by 2027. And so, as we really pull that back of what would it take for us to be the most diverse tech hub, what became clear was, because it's based on percentage, and most of the hubs are ranked around gender and race, right? It's between those two that help really identify it. If we were to, because our other goal is to double the tech workforce in the next 5 years, with half of that being diverse. But if we were to double it and become the most diverse tech hub, if we were to add 60,000 women of color to our workforce, we would be the most diverse tech hub in the country. That's it. Right. 60,000 women of color would change everything. And so as soon as we saw that, we also then looked at, do we have 60,000 women of color who would be in a position to actually change careers, right? And so that was then the question of, what is it that we need to do to radically transform the landscape of our community, and to get this to where we have these numbers that it represents the diversity in our community versus the diversity in the workplace. So it's definitely something that we have a long way to go. For tech on our end, we are looking predominantly at, so for our IT report, we had 4 main categories that we looked at, and that was what we call our core IT. And so that's computer science and information technology, as well as business operations. So that includes project management, marketing management, financials. So that's where we look at everything in fintech and mathematics. And then the 4th is in design. So graphic design, web design, animation, that sort of thing. So those for us those are our 4 main categories, but we also dive deeply into the emerging technology spaces. And so because what's great about technology is it's not a vertical, right? Technology is a thread that we are in every industry. We're in every corner of this community. And so now the bigger challenge is, at what point does your job become classified as a tech job? At what point do you use technology enough that it's considered a tech position? And that's a gray space, right? There's no certain threshold where you use technology 72%, which now officially makes your job tech, right? So it's not always clear.
Yeah, and I would just add, we had over 250 unique position titles represented in the survey. And so I think that's just evidence that the industry is all over the place, and how women see themselves in those roles. The titles vary depending on organization. So we had technician manager, we had analyst, we had data assistant, we had scientist. I mean, we had over 250 unique positions represented in the survey.
Yeah, I don't know that there's really anybody who can say that their jobs, particularly now, in the way we're having to work, is not touched by technology. I will tell you, I'm pretty even keeled and usually pretty upbeat and optimistic, but when I have a meltdown, it's usually because of some technology. I just had one yesterday because the technology was just not cooperating with me. So I'm glad we more broadly define, because I think there's a perceptual shift that's going to happen, Emily, in order for us to get that 60,000. There has to be a mindset about what technology careers look like, because it's not just coding, which is what oftentimes people think. Leslie, here's a question for, I think that you probably, you see that from Brandy? Yeah. So Brandy's asking about, how can her small business service line, which is in GIS, be a part of the solution? You want to tell her, Leslie?
Brandy, we would love to talk to you, because we actually created a geospatial certificate program in partnership with Maryville and a number of other local geospatial companies. And so we've had really good participation lots of women who are like increasing in interest around geospatial, certainly a sector that's going to be growing here in the region. And so Rung for Women is really trying to be a talent solution for these growing sectors in the region, GIS or geospatial being one of them. So Brandy, let's have a conversation. I'm sure that we are training women of color to move into these roles. If you have open positions, we'd love to be able to talk to you about how we can partner in that space. We are actually having on Thursday a chat around technology careers, and we're going to have a special guest who owns a company come talk about all of the great work that she's doing. Small business owner, African-American female, and in the tech space. So really excited about the conversations that are going to be happening over the next several months related to technology, geospatial, and advanced manufacturing.
Yeah, and you know, I'm so glad you asked that and offered that, Brandy. I already see Lisa is ready to capture your contact information. I was going to mention Lisa Weingarth, our VP of External Affairs. But you know, Emily mentioned this being an ecosystem, and I'm so glad Brandy brought up that point, the comment and the question, because this, you know, trying to address this as either a workforce development issue in which, oh, we just need to get more people trained. It's only very much a part of the solution. This requires a regional approach. It requires an ecosystem that's made up of employers, small businesses, training partners, higher ed, nonprofits. So there's a place for wherever you fall into those categories in terms of your interest in wanting to work or partner with us on addressing this problem. There's a place for you. Leslie and Emily, what would you all say the main points you want the folks on this call to take away? I mean, we've covered a lot, and we certainly didn't want the survey to come across as we just want to tell you how bad things are and then let you move on with your day. What's the takeaway? What's the main point that you'd like to make sure that the folks on this call leave with?
Yeah, I'll start. I would say, you know, for the participants on the call, first and foremost, thank you for being here. We really appreciate you listening and sharing this information in your personal and professional networks. Also, I would say for me, the biggest takeaway, which is becoming more and more important, if you work in spaces and are in positions of influence or hiring, please make sure that your companies are publishing salaries, publishing salary ranges. Salary transparency is just a best practice across the board, but especially in fields where women are coming in underrepresented. We want to make sure that there's fairness in pay and equity. And so for me, that would be the one top item that I would ask people to do, the one top call to action. Secondly, if you're in positions and of influence or in hiring in your organizations, please audit those position descriptions and make sure that the criteria, expectations are really relevant for the job, right? If a degree is not really necessary, stop asking for a degree. Let's just, you know, start to think about being a little more innovative in this space and inclusive. And so those would be my top two takeaways and calls to action for participants on the call.
What about you, Emily? What are you main point takeaways for the participants here?
Well, so, you know, for Tech STL, we are a membership-based organization. Right. That our power and influence comes from our members. And so our biggest goal is to build a large and diverse membership base. So we just introduced individual memberships because we were getting so much interest from the community, because we've got the organizational members and we have over 300 organizational members now. But we now have individuals because there has been a lot more interest from individuals who are wanting to get involved, who are wanting to be part of these conversations. And so even like the corporate allyship program, as well as our Women in Tech program, our Black Tech program, our Queer Tech program, like all of these initiatives that we're launching, they're being built and driven by our members. So I would say if this is something that you are interested in, right now, we also have a holiday special that it's only $50 for the year. So to join Tech STL, to have an annual membership for 2023, it's only $50 to come on board as an individual. That's active until New Year's. We also have, so we have a free membership for 18 to 24-year-olds called Next Gen that we're working in partnership with the universities and training partners, because we really want to make sure that we have the next generation of tech leaders and tech talent here in the community, that they're at the table as well. So, and we have what's called a community stakeholder membership. So if you are a startup or a small nonprofit, you're able to apply. We have 250 free memberships for organizations that you can apply for. So there is a seat at our table. And if this is something that you're interested in being a part of, helping us shape the data, helping us shape the programs, we would love to have you involved. You're able to go to our website and sign up, or you can reach out to me and I'm happy to talk through it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And yes, this will be recorded. Just as a reminder, we will be recording and sharing this on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Last question before we wrap up, and I'll make sure you all know how to reach out to both organizations, but employers, and I don't know, Brandy certainly mentioned her business, but some of you all may be representing other companies. What are the recommendations to employers and to companies as it relates to things that they can do specifically to address the supports that women need at all levels in the workplace? What would you all say your recommendations for employers would be?
Yeah, I mentioned two of them: the salary transparency,
Yeah.
and of course, the audit of positions. But just reducing education requirements if they aren't really relevant to the role. Providing upskilling opportunities. So we talked a little bit about that, either upskilling or reskilling. I actually had a great conversation with Boeing yesterday, and I think they do a fantastic job of helping people reskill. So if you maybe enter as a contractor, you can go explore being a welder, and then as you grow, you could move into technology roles. And there's so much, it's a big company, but there's so much growth potential and opportunity to upskill in companies like that. But also for training partners, there are lots of great training opportunities to upskill, especially now post-COVID, to really get more diverse talent into these sectors and environments. Emily talked a lot about mentorship and making sure that there's a formal mentorship opportunity or pathway within certain corporate environments. And then I know for all of us, the focus continues to be on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So making sure that cultures are safe and welcoming for people of all backgrounds is something that we all need to continue to work towards as a goal for companies in our region.
Yeah. What about you, Emily? Company recommendations for companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges is that we're officially entering a new phase of DEIA work. And that like the first phase was talking about it and embracing it, right? Like talking about doing it. We're now entering the phase where you now have to do it, right? It's now about implementation. It's about policy. It's about advocacy. It's about transparency. It's about changing processes and accountability. And that's a lot harder, especially when you're dealing with very large companies, right? And so I think we're having, as a region, we're having to not only push and incentivize the actual integration of updated policy and seeing these things take shape, but we're having to help support making that an easier transition, sharing this information, celebrating the companies that are doing this. As horrible as it sounds, still one of the biggest motivations is optics and PR.
Yes.
Right? Like companies will move mountains if they feel like they're going to get good press. And so like whatever is going to incentivize them to fix these things, letting their company, their team members be really their cheerleaders of if they're doing great things, how are we celebrating them? But also how are we helping as a community to instill the kind of change that we know needs to take place. So I think that a lot of this for Tech STL, we're trying to really look at what is the role that we can play.
Yes.
I'm a huge advocate of that. Find the thing that only you can do, that no one else is in a position to do, and then do it. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for funding. Do it anyways, right? With Tech STL, we have had no money and we've had no staff. I've been the only staff member. We've had a very low budget, but we did it anyway, right?
Absolutely.
And right now, there's a lot of power in doing the hard work because it needs to be done, and don't wait for the city to give you permission.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's the era that we're really looking at for 2023, and how we're empowering the people who are in these positions who are ready to rise up and implement something better. How are we empowering them to do it?
Absolutely. And we have a question, in fact, about just building personal agency and addressing those issues. Emily, you are certainly a trailblazer. And I think for women to stop saying, who's going to let me, and start saying who's going to stop me, would move us a lot further along. But I'll answer this really quickly before we get off. Somebody asked about, are we considering issues of personal agency when building ally programs? I can speak specifically to the work we're doing here at Rung in terms of our programming and the process for supporting the members, the women that we serve. We do have a proprietary curriculum we designed called Professional Power Skills, in which we are addressing specifically issues around workplace dynamics and what do you do when you're the first and only in a work setting as a woman of color. And so we talk a lot about that self-determination, the agency, the building the confidence, and the ability to advocate for yourself. So I wanted to make sure, I saw somebody ask that, but I know we're coming to the end of our webinar here. Leslie or Emily, any closing thoughts before we sort of close it out? And I make sure that everybody knows our website. Also, there will be a link to the survey results. Is that going to be in the chat, either Danielle or Lisa? There's a link so that if you'd like to receive the actual survey results, we will share that with you, as well as the recording of the webinar today. Any closing thoughts, lady?
I just, again, would say thank you. I see, members, I see board members, I see friends of Rung. I'm just so grateful that those of you who joined us this morning took time out of your day to share in this experience and really learn about how you can influence your own personal networks and be a change agent in your professional environment. So thank you for being here, and happy holidays.
Yeah. Emily?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I would say is that it's easy to feel like you're alone in this. And I mean, it's between even just Leslie and I, like, there are so many people who've got your back that are working really hard to make this happen. If you want to be part of what we're doing, reach out, right? Like, we acknowledge that none of this is done alone. Success is not done with one organization or one individual, that this will take a village. And so if it's something that you're interested in getting involved in, come talk to us. Our doors are always open, and we'd love to have you be part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we are trying to take this one moment to a movement. So we appreciate you all joining us this morning. Once again, if you'd like to connect with us, we are at Rung for Women and at Tech STL. Website is rungforwomen.org and techstl.com. The information is in the chat if you'd like to receive information on the survey results. But we are at time, and we want to be respectful of your time. So thank you all again for joining us. And until we see you again, keep being amazing, ladies and gentlemen, if there's one on the call. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you. Leslie and Emily, you all rock. I always got your back. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Everyone.
See you soon.